Hello, and welcome back to our React with Node and Express tutorial series on Turbo 360. In the last video, we set up our React code base on the project, and we rendered our first React component on our home template. So we got our React code working basically. And in this video, we're going to continue with that process and start building out the React UI. So we're going to create a subcomponent where we are going to eventually render our blog posts and continue building out the actual React interface. So let's get into it. Here I am at the end of the last video, and I'm going to run the dev server and make sure everything is still properly functioning. And make sure everything looks good here. And here is the code from the last video. Okay, let's turn off the server and let's keep working on the code. So all the React code is inside this src directory, and we created this app component, which is going to be our entry point. And for the most part, the entry point of a React app usually is pretty simple. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's an entry point. So we're going to create subcomponents that will be imported into this entry point, and we're going to render those subcomponents from the entry point instead. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's head over to our src directory, and let's create a new directory called components. And let's cd into that. And let's create a new component in here called posts. And this will be the component which renders our blog posts. So let's go ahead and create that and then cd back to the root level, because this is kind of where you want to stay. That's sort of our home base. And let's open up the posts component and let's create another React app out of it. I'm sorry, another React component. So we want to import React and the component submodule. And then we're going to create a class called posts. And this will also subclass the component submodule. And remember, every React component has to override the render function, and that has to return some HTML or JSX in this case. So we're going to call this, this is the posts component. Okay, and you may have noticed that this time we did not import the React DOM. That's because we're not going to directly mount this onto our template. We're going to import it into another module, specifically the app.js file right here. So instead of mounting it onto the template, we want to just export it. So we do export default and then posts. And this way we can import it into other components and render it from other components instead. So this makes it a reusable module basically. So now we go back to our index.js, our entry point, and now we can import that from the components posts like that. So inside the entry point, the index.js, we are importing the posts from the components directory. And then rather than saying this is the React app, we can get rid of that and render the posts container instead, post component, excuse me. And then if you reload the dev server, and then reload the page, you're going to see that nothing changed. And that's because we didn't recompile the code. So remember, all this has to be transpiled into our ES5 directory here. So we didn't do that. So what we need to do is do that before we relaunch the server. So normally what I like to do is open a second window in my terminal by doing Command T, and I do webpack-d. You don't have to do this, it's just a habit that I maintain. It keeps it easier for me to stay organized with what's doing what. So now we recompiled the code, and I head back to my web terminal, and I do turbo dev server. and I can reload, and now I have, this is the post component, and that's great, so it worked. So now we have the posts component showing up in the entry point, and in here it's its own module. So here's where we can start really laying out some more UI. So I'm going to turn off the dev server now and start laying out the UI to show the actual blog posts. So let's call this, let's see here, let's give this a header tag, and let's call it recent posts, except spell it right. And then we're going to render this in an ordered list. Actually, let's go with an unordered list. And these require a list item tag. And let's call it post 1, 2, 3, and 4. So don't forget to recompile. And rerun the dev server. Actually, you can just leave this on, to be honest. I don't know why I keep on turning it off, but okay, so now we're seeing post 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the recent post header. So now we can continue building out this UI. So everything here is properly working. Now, normally this data is held in what's called the state. So the state of a component is one area where data can be stored in a component. So there's actually two areas where data can be stored in a component. One is called state and another is called props. I mean, there's more than those two, but those are the two that really matter. And they each have their own reasons, and we'll explore each one. To begin, we're going to use the state. So basically what we have to do is set up a state object inside the component to maintain the state. So we do that by setting up what's called a constructor. And we have to call super. Don't worry too much about this for now. Just understand that you have to set up a constructor, and then inside here we set up a state object like that. And this is going to be the state of the posts component. And then here we can create a recent posts array. And this is going to be just an array of JSON objects, just regular objects. So let's create a couple objects. So let's call it title, post 1, post 2, 3, and 4. And for now, that'll be the entirety of the JSON object. This is called a JavaScript notation object, JavaScript object notation object. And eventually, we're going to fill out more details here. So instead of rendering just exactly these 4 every single time, we're going to render it from the state. So here, what we want to do is we want to iterate through this recent posts array and render a list item for each one of these posts. So we do that using the map function. So the first thing we need to do is break open a curly brace right here like that. And essentially, whatever you do inside of these curly braces, inside of a JSX syntax, is pretty much standard JavaScript. So this is, you can now write pretty much standard JavaScript in here. So we're going to do this dot state and then recent posts, and then we're going to map through each of the recent posts, and that takes a function which is basically a representative of each item inside the array. And then we're going to return in here, we're going to return, let me just get rid of these extra spaces. Inside here, we want to return a list item, li, for each post. And we want to return inside the list item the title of the post. So we do curly brace like that, and then post title. And the reason why we have another curly brace here is because we're referencing directly the JSON object. We're not hard coding the text. We're grabbing the text from the JSON object, so that this also needs to be inside of its own curly brace. And then I'm going to recompile the code. And this time I left the server on, so we don't need to worry about that. And I think it recompiled already. I'm going to do it one more time because I lost track of it. There it is. And then if I reload, I'll see the same thing because I only have 4 posts again. So if I add one more into the state, and do post 5, and I can rerun the transpiler, rerun Webpack. This time I should see post 5 on the server. And that's it. And so that worked. So we are now referencing the data from the state. Now there's a couple small details worth pointing out here. If I open the console editor in my browser by doing Option Command I if you're using Chrome, you're going to see an error message right here. Each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. This is a React thing. Basically, whenever you loop through an array or a list of items, like we're doing right here, there has to be a key property inside the actual item you return. So we should do key equals post title, like that. And then that'll take care of this error right here. Now this key value has to be unique. That's why it says a unique key prop. So instead of title, typically what's done is the ID. So every post is going to have an ID property. So I'm just going to give it the index of the array. One, two, three, four. And then this is going to be post.id instead. And this is a more conventional way of handling the unique key property in any kind of iteration in JSX and React. So let's go ahead and rerun the Webpack. And then reload the server. And we're still seeing the same posts, but that error has now gone away. And don't worry about this one right here. It's not a big deal. We'll take care of that when we bundle our code for production. So this is now good to go. And so now we have our post component rendering some posts from the state. So that is now all set. But in reality, these should come from a server. And that is really the traditional way of handling this kind of data. So we already have a Node Express server set up in this project. That's why we copied it from the Vertex template. And it already has support for blog posts. And so in the next video, we're going to explore how that's connected. And then we're going to actually query the server for these blog posts and render that here instead of what's statically listed in the state. So you may have noticed that even so, right here, this really is static code because we can't change this once we've compiled the code. And so a server is really meant to handle, make this more dynamic. So in the next video, we're going to connect it to our server and going to make sure everything is properly rendering from the server data instead of the statically inserted data inside the state right here. So hopefully you got everything working. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.